The female reproductive system, or the ovarian reproductive system, is the system that's responsible for producing gametes and reproductive hormones in the female. This is obviously going to be the system that deviates most between the two sexes, since one sex is responsible for producing sperm, the other sex produces eggs, and is ultimately also going to be responsible for supporting a developing fetus and delivering it outside of the world. Unlike the male reproductive system, which has some external or has a large external component to it, the female reproductive system is located primarily in the pelvic cavity, with some of it still extending outside. So the ovaries are the female gonads. The gamete they produce is known as an oocyte. So we'll talk about the female structures as well as the process of oocyte production as well. So let's start with the vagina. So if we look at some of these structures in the cross section and the frontal section, you can see the vagina being covered by two exterior layers, the labia majora and the labia minora. The vagina is going to extend back to the cervix, which is ultimately the most exposed portion that leads to the uterus where the child develops. So the vagina is a muscular canal that serves as the entrance to the reproductive tract, and it serves as the exit from the uterus during menses and childbirth. The outer walls of the anterior and posterior vagina are formed into longitudinal columns, and the superior portion of the vagina, which we call the fornix, it is going to meet the protruding uterine cervix. The walls are lined with an outer fibrous adventitia, the middle layer of smooth muscle, and an inner layer of stratified squamous epithelium that rest on a lamina propria. The epithelium is going to form some transverse folds, which are known as rulcae, which increase the surface area and allow for stretching. The vagina is also home to a population of microorganisms that help to protect against infection by other bacteria that are pathogenic, or yeast or other organisms that could possibly enter the vagina. In a healthy person, the most predominant type of vaginal bacteria is from the genus Lactobacillus. This family of bacteria is beneficial and secretes lactic acid, which protects the vagina by helping to maintain an acidic pH. Now, if we take a look at the female gonads or ovaries, you'll see that these are a paired set of organs that are about 2 to 3 centimeters in length. They are going to be located within the pelvic cavity, supported by the mesovarium, which is an extension of the peritoneum that connects the ovaries to the broad ligament. The fimbriae is going to be a portion of the uterine tube or fallopian tube that is going to make contact with the ovarian. So you have the ovary. The fimbriae are going to give rise to the oviduct, which is going to then connect to the uterus. The broad ligament and the ovarian ligament are helping support these structures as shown in the image. Externally, the female reproductive structures are known as the vulva. You have the prepuce and the glans clitoris found on the more superior portion of the structure. You can see the urethral opening being just superior to the vaginal opening, as shown here. The corpus cavernosum and the bulb vestibule, you can see, are going to lie superiorly to these two openings and also surround them laterally. You also will have Bartholli's glands, which are going to produce secretions that are going to help aid the female reproductive system. The ovarian cycle is going to be quite, or the ovarian cycle is the cycle that really determines how the oocytes are produced each month. So in the reproductive years, you have roughly a 28-day cycle that's going to be correlated with the menstrual cycle, but it is not the same thing as the menstrual cycle. They are an interrated process that is going to ultimately coincide with what is going on with the female reproductive system. So the cycle, the ovarian cycle, is going to include oogenesis, which is the production of gametes, and folliculogenesis, which is the development of the ovarian follicles. So we're going to look at oogenesis, which starts with the oogonium. That is the female germ cell that can divide by mitosis to give a primary oocyte, divide by mitosis to replenish itself, or to give rise to cells that will ultimately go through meiosis. The process is going to happen very early on in development. So meiosis 1 begins while the individual is still within their mother's stomach. So you really have the eggs that ultimately are going to give rise to a child being formed before the person that is even the person that's going to give rise to this next person is even born. So meiosis 1 arrests at prophase before birth actually occurs. So many hours later, add in the SpongeBob meme about something taking a long time. After puberty, you have meiosis 1 continuing, where you have the secondary oocyte being produced. The secondary oocyte is then haploid, so meiosis 1 has completed, and you now have cells that lack homologous pairs, and so they have sister chromatids present. One cell is going to go on to produce the final oocyte that is going to be the egg that gets fertilized. The other one is known as a first polar body. This is because the division is uneven. So the secondary oocyte will arrest at metaphase 2, and the continuation won't happen until after sperm penetration has occurred, when meiosis 1 is complete, and that is when you have the mature ovum. So here we can see your two ends, so you have homologous pairs and sister chromatids present. Here the homologous pairs are gone, but the sister chromatids are still present. Here you don't have anything but the sister chromatids, and you have several polar bodies being produced as you go through this. With the first polar body, you may have division as well, forming the secondary polar bodies, or it may not divide at all. So these end up not being gametes. The only one that is a gamete is this oocyte here, because you had unequal divisions during these two phases of meiosis. So this brings us to folliculogenesis. So it starts with the primordial follicle, where your oocyte is going to be located within it. You can see the nucleus of the oocyte and the ovary cortex cells lying outside of that. The granulosa cells are going to be supportive cells that go around the primordial follicle. The primordial follicle is going to give rise to the primary oocyte, or the primary follicle. The oocyte is present, but now you have a zona pellucida, so a clear zone that's surrounding it. You can see the granulosa cells have started to make a lining around the outer portion of the follicle. Secondary follicle is when you start to have granulosa cells start to form multiple layers. The zona pellucida becomes more obvious, and you have some separation from the oocyte from the rest of the follicle. You also have theca cells that are helping to support this development. Tertiary follicle, so now the oocyte is really starting to be forming around an antrum. The cortex of the follicle is going to be surrounded. You still have the granulosa cells present and the theca cells that are supporting them. When the follicle ovulates, you get the oocyte and some cells surrounding them. So the granulosa cells are still going to be present, leaving the ovary behind, and you have a ruptured follicle, which is going to become the corpus luteum. You still have the ovary present within the ovary. And then the fate of the corpus luteum and the oocyte will depend on whether fertilization is going to occur or not. Something to note is that you actually have many follicles present, but only about one every month is going to make it to this ovulating phase. Many are going to start develop, but then atrophy and not continue. So 99% of the follicles of the ovary will go undergo atresia. So that's ATRESIA, all one word, even though there's a space there. That is where they just quit forming and kind of disintegrate or don't fully form. Atrophy, that's the word I'm looking for. All right, so let's talk about the follicular development. So you have the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary involved, along with the gonadotropin releasing hormone like you did in the males. So the first part is the follicular phase. This is going to have the effect that LH and FSH are going to stimulate the follicles to grow. The ovarian hormone effects are going to then be that the ovaries are going to produce estradiol, which has a negative feedback inhibition on those, but will also cause the uterus endometrium to thicken. The next phase where ovulation occurs is going to involve the pituitary hormone effect, where LH and FSH, you still have that stimulation occurring, but now you have a switch in what is happening to the estradiol that is being produced. So you have significant estradiol actually feeding forward and causing more of the FSH and the LH to be secreted. So this happens when you have extremely high levels of estrogen overriding that feedback mechanism. This surge is going to cause an LH, so it's an LH surge that's going to cause ovulation to then occur. And then in the third phase, the luteal phase, the LH stimulate the formation of a corpus luteum. So notice that you have stopped producing estradiol here. Instead, you're producing progesterone, or estradiol, I should say, has gone down, which has that negative feedback effect. The corpus luteum is producing these as stimulated by the LH and FSH, also producing the progesterone, causing the endometrium to basically make the surface of the uterus ideal for pregnancy to occur. All right, so let's look at what's going on in the ovulation phase, so we're looking at what's happening to both the estrogen and the follicle stimulating hormone, the luteinizing hormone, estrogen, and progesterone during pregnancy. So the pituitary hormones, they are going to start low for the first week. You can see that the estrogen is starting to go up around day 7. You have a slow rising until you reach a point that is going to trigger that LH surge. FSH also goes up with it. So after that, the estrogens are going to start going back down, but this triggers ovulation around day 14. When ovulation occurs, estrogen goes down, but now the corpus luteum is going to be making and secreting progesterone, which goes up. Meanwhile, FSH and LH are going to go back down to their normal levels. Progesterone peaks, and then if this phase will ultimately, this is what it looks like if pregnancy does not occur. There will be more complicated things going on after pregnancy continues. All right, so that is the cycle. Let's take a look then at the ovarian tubes and what is going on with that. So some of these structures are labeled, but we're going to start. You see the ovary here is attached to the uterus via the ovarian ligament, and the broad ligament connects it to the uterus and the oviduct. You also have a suspensory ligament that's going to hold and be adjacent to the ovarian artery in the vein. The fimbriae are going to be picking up the oocyte that is being released. On the most close side to the oviduct or the ovary, you have the infundibulum. So the oviduct starts with the infundibulum, continues to the ampulla, and ultimately is going to reach the isthmus before it enters into the ovary. The fundus of the uterus is going to be the topmost portion. If we look at the surface of the uterus, you have an endometrium covering a myometrium and then a perimetrium that surrounds the bottom. All right. All right. So let's look at the menstrual cycle. So we're looking at what happened to the ovaries. Now we're going to be looking at what's happening to the follicular phase, or the follicle. So the follicular phase is days 1 through 7, where you have primordial follicles become primary follicles. Some of them will go through selection, others will go through atresia. This is constantly happening during the early stage, so it happens for about 2 months. The tertiary follicle is going to be selected once each new menstrual cycle, and that is going to be the follicle that ultimately continues on in this process. So if we look at the ovarian cycle phases on the top and the uterine cycle phases on the bottom, you can see the tertiary follicle around day 7 is being formed. It's going to ovulate around day 14, and then you have the corpus luteum become the corpus albicans, which is just really what it becomes if pregnancy does not occur and it continues to degenerate. The uterine cycle phases are going to be coincide with this. So you have menses, which are the first 7 days when the uterine lining is shed. The proliferative phase, which is when the uterine lining starts to build up. And then the secretory phase, which is when you have the secretion of hormones occurring because you have secretion, you have the uterine wall preparing for pregnancy. So if pregnancy occurs, it's going to be in this phase right here that that is going to happen. So we looked at what happens now, but we will look at in the next video what happens when pregnancy does actually occur, and look at the process of fertilization and development.